Hi, this lecture is titled Cool City, and it's actually a repeat or update of the first lecture that I gave you at the first week of this course because that was not recorded. So I'm doing again with some changes at the end. Uh, so, okay, as I mentioned before, that city of Seoul, which is the capital of South Korea, is nestled within a bowl surrounded by prominent peaks on its four sides. And you can see the mountains, uh, Begaksan Mountains in the north, and Inwansan Mountain in the west, and Taraksan Mountain to the east, and Mongmuksan to the south. The mountain ranges are higher in north and south, and the water that drains from that uh, falls into flat plain and eventually drains into Han River, which you see in below here. Okay, and because this is a kind of a bowl here, and the mountains range here and a smaller mountain here, that all the water drains off to this stream that basically goes east and west, and that stream is called Cheonggyecheon. Okay, and this actually is essentially becomes the main axis of the city, and it in fact the main street, if you call in Seoul called Jong Row, runs parallel very close to Cheonggyecheon. In this old map shows that the landscape of Seoul is depicted here uh, when it was called Hanyang for 500 years during Joseon Dynasty, which preceded before the Republic of Korea, which is South Korea. And according to the Pungsu, which is same as Feng Shui in China, a kind of a geomancy of the spatial characteristic of the landscape and how its relationship with the society and or even as a nation. Seoul is described as a place usually shaped of a mother embracing a baby. And that's the kind of, uh, let's say, visual identity that city had for centuries. And let's take a look at Cheonggyecheon more specifically in his history. Oops, sorry, this is back to the, okay. So as you can see, at the highest peak on the north side of the city, or at least the old city of Seoul, Bukhansan Mountain, as I indicated here, and as you see in this picture, behind it is the city of Seoul, kind of nestled between all the mountains that are surrounding. And as this is old map of Seoul again, showing that same characteristic as I showed you in the map before. The streams drain from the mountains on the north side and the south side and draining into Cheonggyecheon. The major places that you see here are the palaces of the Joseon Dynasty, and then the gray areas are the street patterns of the city. And as you can see, once again, that is a kind of a relatively flat area that nestles surrounded by the mountains. And these lines are the city wall that also protected, built, and to protect the city. Cheonggyecheon in 1940, as this image shows, was occupied by slum residents. It was informal housing built during rapid urbanization of Seoul. That means that people from the countryside moved into the city, as well as the refugees from North Korea when the Korea was divided in 1945 into two parts, which was proposed by United States military, accepted by Soviet Union, in which the Korean people did not have any saying to that. Division of Korea was decided by the superpowers, the winners of the Second World War. At that time, Korea was occupied, annexed territory of Japanese Empire, who lost the war, and therefore the winners of that war, South Korea, United States and Soviet Union, determined the fate of Korea in the post-World War II, which later brought in 1950 Korean War. But between 1945 and 1950, besides the massive movement of people from the countryside into the city, including Seoul, but also, as I mentioned earlier, great mass of refugees from North Korea who wanted to leave North Korea and come to the South. And because they had no homes, they built their own homes along the river of Cheonggyecheon, as well as in the hillside surrounding the city that you will see later. Then Cheonggyecheon was covered with new roads. And you can see in the background that these informal homes that were built by people, refugees and migrants, and they are essentially like what we know today, like in favelas in Latin America, especially famous in Brazil. And then eventually this was covered up by these columns that would hold up a new road that covered over the creek. You can even see down here children's playing with on top of the construction material. And this is another view of Cheonggyecheon, construction being covered. And it was covered for 20 years, starting from 1958. And then after the road was covered completely, there was also a new elevated highway that was 5.6 kilometers long. And that 5.6 kilometer would be about, let's say, a little under 4 miles long, and the 16-meter wide elevated highway. I would say that would be about 50 feet wide. It was completed in 1976. So you see that these pylons built to hold up eventually a road that would be built on top of this road or the elevated highway. There's also, you see bridges across, this is a famous complex of department stores, shops, apartments that was built in late 1960s. And it's 1 kilometer long super block, and they connect to each other over the creeks. So these bridges are once that connected over the creeks. The purpose of course, these roads and the elevated highway was to provide better transportation, obviously, but it was also to visually exemplify successful industrialization and modernization of South Korea that was underway during that time. However, the, a new idea was formed in early 2000 by then mayor of Seoul City, Lee Myung-bak, who is commonly called as MB, who later became the president of South Korea, who is now one of the two successive ex-presidents in jail for around 20 years or more, in his case for corruptions. But he had this idea that was widely supported at the time, was to demolish the elevated highway and to recover and restore Cheonggyecheon again as a creek. Much of this was also because that these roads and elevated highways were beginning to deteriorate. Its maintenance costs were rising, and there was a fear that they had to be rebuilt. So instead of rebuilding, a better idea came along, which is to uncover the creek and turn it into a park. So here you see the elevated highways that were built before, and it goes through the city. And this is the old downtown area where you see some of the taller buildings. And this picture is probably taken around maybe late 70, early 80. And then it comes in at the other end, which is showing right here, that it started to come down into other roads in the center of the city. This highway, elevated highway, was active for 30 years until 2003, when the demolition of the roads began. So here you see kind of a progress of the whole process of restoring the creek, the elevated highway here, and then the demolition of the highway you can see here, and then a new park that was built. The creek was restored and a linear park was built along. It's a bit slightly depressed from these other surrounding roads, and the water flowing since after decades, as most cities have experienced, that the natural water flow from the mountains or from underground has depleted because of growth of the city, rise of population, and greater use of water by people as well as agriculture and other environmental problems that we know very well, have reduced the amount of flow water. So they say that more than 50% of water actually is artificially pumped from Han River to create enough flow of water to make this linear park more successful and kind of, let's say, enhanced or artificially recreating the natural flow of Cheonggyecheon. And you see here at the far end of Cheonggyecheon Restored, And this is actually headed to very center of the old downtown, intersecting with a major road that leads up to the palace of Gyeongbok Palace, which is the main palace of the Joseon Dynasty political power, and heads south this direction toward Han River, which creates a very strong north and south axis in the city of Seoul, established and strengthened by during the Japanese colonial occupation. The project here disputed that it says $900 million project, but there are also other figure which is much lower at slightly below 300 million US dollars. And you will see that information in a PDF document of Cheonggyecheon produced by the Metropolitan Government of Seoul. And that's actually in Canvas. And that has a lot more detailed information about the restoration of Cheonggyecheon that would be very helpful for your research assignment. And it was major undertaking, and although there's much criticism by environmentalists and let's say urban planners and designers that the creek is artificial. It was not restored to its natural original state. However, it's widely enjoyed by people, citizens of Seoul and South Korea, people who visit, as it provides alternative pathway through the city away from vehicle traffics, much safer and much cooler. In fact, that is indicated in the document that you have in from the Metropolitan Government of Seoul. And often there is, let's say, events like this music event here that goes on throughout the year that provides cultural and entertainment venues. And that is another function that this new linear park is providing. Some of the recreation in the original state includes recovery of old stone bridges that people used to use. That is very easy to cross the river without building a bridge and so forth. And you can see this kind of throughout, not only here, but throughout Korean cities, towns, and villages, especially in agricultural areas. And it's a very much kind of part of a cultural landscape of South Korea. And here you can see, in certain sections, quite a bit of naturalization have already taken place. It may not be exactly in its original state, certainly not when it was used as a shantytown or a slum neighborhood by the refugees and migrants. So it's a much better state of natural and aesthetic condition today. Part of the old elevated highway, like the three pillars, are left as a kind of reminders of the past. And along actually near, there's actually a museum for Cheonggyecheon. And what you see here is maybe some of the kind of interesting aspect. These are high-rise apartment buildings, all of these white buildings that have become very popular and in South Korea and Seoul. In fact, 51% of all South Koreans live in these high-rise apartment buildings. This one is somewhat unique architecturally, and it is a combination of apartments and office spaces. Again, right next to these three, sorry, going back the wrong way. Um, these three pillars from the old demolished overpass elevator highway is a museum for Changechun. This building here with kind of, this is acrylic surface facade. And in front of it is reconstruction of a shantytown housing. And the whole length, you can see here an overview, a plan, the master plan of Changechun, showing that the flow of water, there's another creek that empties into here at this point, and the kind of linear park that begins to develop. As it goes closer to Han River, it gets wider, so there's more space to build different amenities for urban park. Now, another interesting site that will become the sites of your speculative design later, and this is part that I have updated from the original lecture because my research team for Cool City has produced some new documents that is now available. So I'm updating these. But the wells, water wells, of course, were used from ancient time throughout Seoul or many other cities around the world. Before that, we start to supply water through pipes and pumps and so on. Before that, we had citywide water delivery infrastructure. But I also, as well, mentioned that many of the hillside around the Seoul, because of massive urbanization, migration of people into the city, which at the time in 1970s were annually 300,000 per year, huge number. So people built their own informal, let's say illegal homes on the hills. So these are pretty much self-built homes. And along there, very dense area, there was no place people to enjoy as parks and other amenities that much modernized, economically developed city. And this is image from 1980s. And so kids play out in the street and so on. And then you see examples where governments tried to build quick, inexpensive temporary housing for immigrants. And then you see that it was important that it be located in a water well because they didn't have a water delivery to these individual housing units. And here's a condition of housing in 1970 throughout Seoul City, and only half had toilets, 60% had bathrooms in their own homes, and 60% used actually coal heating, and only 10% had modern central heating system. Today, these shanty towns have developed much more. Now they have all the necessary modern infrastructure as electric lines, sewage lines, water systems, and everything. This is not in Seoul, but this is actually one of the examples in city of Busan. And they have remained if they were not replaced by high-rise apartment buildings. So within this area, there were wells throughout, but now they are not used because water is being delivered through infrastructure of pipes. And much of the wells are either buried under the buildings or filled, uh, not to be used again. But you still find occasionally some wells that are still visible, not necessarily being used, but they become possible sites for us to use using water to cool city. So there are three wells that my research team has found in Seoul last week and considered that be worthwhile to as a site for speculative design in this course. One is called Bukjang Water Well, and all three wells are in an area called Bukchon. Its literal translation is North Village. Uh, it's an old residential area next to the main palace of Joseon Dynasty, and it's famous for old traditional Korean homes, which is called hanok, and it's one of the tourist destinations for visitors. So you see here that finger pointing where the well is, and this is a kind of depressed area, a kind of walkway down. Uh, this is example of old traditional Korean home. They're all one story. They're walled in. They usually have a courtyard right in the middle. And again, it's called hanok. And you see this building here and this brick chimney, which you see in the next picture, is actually what used to be a public bath. Uh, Before people had bathrooms at their own homes, there were public baths where people went to clean. And they were common throughout the city. Now they're pretty much gone. They're replaced by more a modernized version of it called sauna, which is Konglish for sauna, and uh, and those are still very popular. In fact, it's one of my favorite places to go when I'm in Seoul or anywhere in South Korea. And so the location of this now sauna before public bath is obviously nearby the source of water because much of these sauna uses has its own well below the ground, and some claim to go down several hundred feet to get water for their sauna or public bath. So this is a picture without the researcher finger pointing the direction where it is. So you see that it's walking down from a main road, and we're in the old areas of city of Seoul. So you see a lot of very small streets that are only for pedestrians, the way it used to be before much of the neighborhood have changed. And so if you walk down this way, through these steps, you will come to basically a well opening. Okay. Now this is actually a well, but it was probably used more as a place not only get water, but actually place perhaps to uh, wash clothes. Um, the current condition is not the way it was before, uh, but usually a well would have, in the next site, you will see kind of, as you saw before, a round barrel-like shape. If the water is coming out from the sideway, as opposed to getting water through a pulley and a bucket, then it's most likely it was used as a place to wash clothes. And you're talking about we're talking about this is a period before modern appliances like washing machines that we have now. And still there's water coming out uh, from, it's difficult to see, but there's water here on the ground. And on the previous picture, you saw that this is ice. It's cold right now. It's winter time, so that ice shows an indication of water is still flowing out from this well. And then this is a sign that's showing that it says, for noted for its freshness and purity, water from this Pukjeong well was supplied only to royal palaces during the Joseon dynasty. And Korean explanation is a little bit longer, and that in Joseon dynasty, only the people in the palace was allowed to use this water well. And other than that, there were always kind of covered with locks, so the public could not use it. And they actually had soldiers to securing, make sure that no public would be able to use it. The other water well is called Seokjeong water well. And this is really for actually for drinking water in the more traditional sense. You see that there is a kind of cylindrical opening. Although that further investigation necessary, it might have been also used as a place for washing clothes. On the side of this well, maybe there was areas that water flowed out into more like a stream or even a pool, because washing areas were very common throughout cities and towns in those days. And they usually obviously has to be along together with the water wells. So it's supplied both for consumption as well as other domestic uses such as washing clothes. But this is remaining, as you see that it's covered with, let's say, a heavy-duty plexiglass shield, so that you'd be able to look down but not able to enter, because a lot of these unused wells were covered up in order to protect from like people falling in, especially children, or people dumping trash into it, which you'll find in my further down, either this lecture or another lecture, actually another lecture. And so unused well were basically all covered up. So I want to show you also the kind of surrounding area images, because in order to use these wells for speculative design in our course, I wanted to make sure that there was enough space to, let's say, construct something, right? Either a garden or a pavilion or other ways to make this space not just as a kind of historical marking, a place of history, but also be able to use today for purposes other than consumption of water. For our purposes, it's about how to use the water to cool the area around it. Okay. So one could actually propose an idea such as this building here could be using the water from the well, going through the building, a kind of new system of engineering that able to cool this building without using air conditioning, or even this building, or this building. Right? Here you see a traditional Korean house, hanok, still left. And then maybe this area which is not part of the street area here, as you see. I'm also talking about this area, same. Maybe could be used to make a little mini park or even a garden. Again, you see another view of the well. These are, by the way, these are houses that are built primarily in the 60s and 70s, a kind of pseudo-modernist style. They all had flat roof, which people use for different functions, very popular. And as you can see, garages and parking cars are big problems in the city of Seoul, especially in the old district. And people park over the sidewalk is very common there. Uh, and that's a problem for almost any cities. And here there's explanations about this well. And this well you can read later in my PDF, but it was recorded as the sites for early baptism ceremonies by some of the first, including the first Catholic priest who was actually a Chinese, who came to Korea to establish a church. And he actually was the first foreign Catholic priest in Korea, as well as continued to be used as a source of water for baptism in churches around the area, including the first Korean Catholic priest in the 19th century. So with these kind of signs that you saw here in the previous water well, the city government has recognized the historic importance of these water wells and made minor effort to preserve them and to include the wells as a part of the kind of touristic historical venue sites to see throughout the city. The third site that I want to show you here is that it's actually right against one of the Joseon Dynasty palace in Seoul called Deoksu Palace. And in fact, the water for this well comes from the other side of this wall, palace wall. The other side is the inner part of the palace. Here is the public area outside of it. And this used to be primarily used for washing clothes. And as it remains now, completely different from, obviously the whole wash area has disappeared. I suspect it was more toward the to your left side, not and outside of the palace area. But today it's basically occupied by new developments, roads, buildings, and so on. But this step was built much later, a part of kind of historical preservation of the well. And as you can go down, you see that the water is coming down from the other side of the palace and still flowing here. And then over here, it's all iced up here. And this palace was outside of, actually, I'm sorry, that is not Deoksu Palace. It's actually Cheongdeok Gung, Cheongdeok Palace. And it was water source all year round for laundry and was under palace wall. The laundry was used not only by court ladies, but many ordinary people. So it's an interesting place to suggest that actually the laundry area may have both inside outside of the palace wall, and this is where people in the palace and ordinary citizens may have met. And it was very popular laundry within the city wall, not this wall, but the big city wall that I described in one of the earlier picture that circles the whole city of the old Seoul. So I have shown you along this presentation three possible sites in which that you would pick one of sites from Seoul, or you can pick one of several sites from the city of Naples for your teams to work on. And this gives you some kind of preparation for your research assignment, because your research assignment is to understand uh, how water have traditionally been used to cool spaces and buildings in different parts of the world. And I'm also going to show you in another lecture wind towers, gardens, and that have also was used to cool cities and buildings and spaces around the world. And maybe that these research on those areas and these technologies together with modern technology could be used to regenerate these water wells that I'm showing you here, to create new speculative design that creates new spaces and new functions for both public communal purposes as well as cooling the surrounding areas around the source of water. So, okay, thank you very much. And this is the end of this lecture.